A 54-year-old fisherman, alone on his weathered boat off the coast of Cape Cod, was no stranger to the sea. His days were filled with routine: cast the nets, check the traps, and return home before the sun set. But today, something felt different. As he steered his boat deeper into the waters, an unusual shimmer caught his eye. A metallic glint beneath the surface, almost too large to be real. His heart skipped a beat as the quiet of the open ocean seemed to hum with an unsettling tension. The object was massive, unnaturally long, and appeared to stretch deeper than the sea's depth should allow. He leaned closer, squinting through the salt-sprayed air, and his gut told him one thing: pull it. As his hands gripped the rope, he felt it, the unmistakable resistance, something pulling back from below. Would you dare to pull this? Subscribe now and follow this story to see what happens next. Harold Blevins had been fishing the Atlantic waters off Cape Cod for more than 3 decades. At 54 years old, he bore the weathered hands and sun-lined face of a man shaped by the sea. His small fishing vessel, Martha Jean, named after his late wife, was modest but reliable. Its creaking deck and rust-kissed railings a familiar rhythm in his otherwise quiet life. He wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. Folks in Provincetown knew him as reserved but dependable. He had his rituals: coffee at 4:30 a.m., engines start by 5, and lines cast before the sun cleared the horizon. It was a Tuesday, and like so many before, the day began without promise of anything more than a few crabs, a handful of bass, and maybe, if the tides were kind, a stray bluefish. The sky was overcast, a sheet of soft gray pressing low over the water, muting the light and sound alike. There was a fog sitting heavier than usual on the water that morning, thick and slow to move. Harold was calm, as always, humming an old tune his father used to whistle while checking the lines he'd set the day before. By 8:15 a.m., he was a few nautical miles off Race Point, a part of the sea he knew like the back of his hand. Nothing about it ever changed. Same currents, same tides, same drop-offs. That's why, when he spotted something peculiar just past the shallows, his brow furrowed immediately. At first it seemed like a dark shape, almost like a shadow, just beneath the surface. But as the Martha Jean crept closer, the sunlight filtered just enough through the fog to reveal something metallic. Not a shimmer, but a dull gleam, like old iron exposed to water for far too long. He eased the throttle, letting the engine grumble to a slow idle. Reaching for his long gaff hook, Harold leaned over the edge of the boat. It wasn't easy to see. It was deep, but there was no mistaking it. A chain, thick, rusted, and impossibly long. Not the kind used for fishing gear or anchoring a buoy. This chain was massive. Each link had to be at least a foot long and looked as if it had been forged in another century. He squinted, following the chain as far as he could with his eyes, but it disappeared into the murk below. He tugged gently with the hook, and to his surprise, it shifted slightly. It wasn't embedded in rock. It was movable, but heavy, incredibly heavy. A chill crept up Harold's spine, one he couldn't shake. Still, he was a man of reason, not imagination. Maybe it was a part of an old wreck. This coast was littered with history: sunken ships, abandoned Navy projects, leftover military equipment. He'd heard stories all his life, but never believed half of them. Still, something about this felt different. He circled the boat slowly, keeping the chain in view. It looped beneath the surface in a perfect curve, disappearing into deeper water. He noticed something then. The chain wasn't lying flat. It was taut, as if something on the other end was keeping it pulled tight. He glanced at the depth sounder. 32 feet. Not unusually deep, but deep enough to conceal something. Something big. The fog began to lift slightly, revealing more of the surrounding sea. It was quiet. Unnaturally quiet. No gulls, no wind, just the soft slap of water against the hull and the low hum of his motor. Harold grabbed a rope from under the deck. It wasn't the smartest idea. He knew that. But instinct, that gut feeling that seasoned fishermen trust more than radar or charts, was telling him he had to know what this chain was connected to. He tied one end of the rope to a cleat on his boat, looped the other end through his pulley winch, and carefully attached the hook to one of the chain's links. He braced himself and began to crank the winch, slowly and steadily. For a moment, it worked. The chain began to rise, inch by inch, through the surface, rust flaking off into the sea. It was ancient for sure, but strong. Still, there was something off. It wasn't just heavy. It felt like something was holding it down. Then it happened. A sudden jerk, violent, so strong it rocked the Martha Jean hard to starboard. Harold stumbled, hitting his knee on the cooler. He scrambled up, clutching the railing. The winch screamed in protest, the rope went taut, and the chain slipped from the hook, snapping back down into the deep with a splash that echoed through the dead silence. Something had pulled back. Harold stared at the water, breathing heavy. Not a fish, not a snag. This was deliberate. This was force. He reached for the radio but stopped. What would he say? Something tugged a giant chain back into the sea. No one would believe him. But he couldn't ignore what he felt. The distinct, intelligent resistance from the other end of that chain. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his jaw, heart thudding. There was no explaining this. He'd been fishing these waters for 30 years and never seen, felt, or even heard of anything like it. Maybe he should leave. Forget it. But he didn't. Instead, he reached into the cooler, pulled out a beer, and stared at the place where the chain had vanished. The water had returned to its placid state, but the tension in the air hadn't. What was down there? He needed a second opinion. Harold wasn't a man of many friends, but he knew who to call. Joe Mancini, a retired Coast Guard diver, now ran a private salvage company just up the coast. If anyone would take him seriously, it was Joe. As the boat drifted slightly, Harold started the engine and turned back toward the harbor, stealing one last look at the water where the chain had disappeared. The sea was hiding something it didn't want him to find. Before we go further, let me ask you this. What do you think was on the other end of that chain? And would you have dared to pull it? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if it's already got your mind spinning. Subscribe now, because what Harold discovers next will change everything he thought he knew about the ocean. And by the way, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. We love seeing how far these mysteries travel. Harold's boat cut through the misty waters with ease, but his thoughts were anything but calm. The brief conversation he'd had with Joe didn't help. The old diver's voice was skeptical, as it always was when Harold called him for something out of the ordinary. You're telling me you found a chain, what, a big one, in the middle of the ocean? And something pulled it back when you tried to reel it in? Joe had asked, the disbelief dripping through his words. Harold tried to explain the tension, the unnerving feeling that something far deeper than mere fishing gear lay beneath the water, but Joe wasn't buying it. I don't know, Harold, maybe it's an old shipwreck or something. But don't go making it out like it's something paranormal, Joe had warned before hanging up. But that didn't sit right with Harold. This wasn't just any chain. The way it had resisted felt deliberate. He wasn't about to let it go so easily. Even if he had to dive down and see for himself, he wasn't going to forget about what had happened today. By the time he reached Joe's marina, the fog had cleared somewhat, revealing a pale blue sky. Harold tied his boat to one of the docks, the wood creaking under his weight as he hopped off. He found Joe standing by a truck, cigarette dangling from his lips, watching a team of divers preparing their gear for an upcoming salvage operation. You sure you want to go down there, old man? Joe teased, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. It's a hell of a lot deeper than you think. I don't know what's down there, Joe, Harold said, voice low and steady. But it's not just a wreck, not like you're thinking. I felt something pulling back, something alive. Joe raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he started loading his gear into the truck bed. You're the boss, but don't say I didn't warn you. Harold wasn't sure what to think of Joe's words, but he pushed them aside. Joe had spent his entire life in the water. If anyone knew what was real and what was a sailor's tall tale, it was him. With a final nod, the two of them climbed into the truck, and the ride back to the harbor was eerily silent. Harold kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was far below the surface of the ocean, drifting with the currents, wondering what kind of ancient creature or long-forgotten shipwreck had been waiting for him there. When they finally arrived back at the dock, Joe quickly set to work assembling the equipment. Harold stood by, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the water. His heart raced again, just as it had when he first noticed the chain, but there was no turning back now. Joe slapped a diving mask over his face and double-checked the oxygen tanks. You sure you don't want to wait for the proper authorities? He asked, grinning under the mask, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. You think the authorities will care about a chain in the sea? Harold muttered. They'll just shrug it off, like they always do. I'm not waiting for that. With one last look at the chain's location, they pushed out into the water. Harold sat at the helm, eyes fixed on the spot where the strange object had been pulled back. It was hard to explain, But his gut told him the more time passed, the less likely it was they'd find answers. What if it was something dangerous? Something that had been hiding for years, waiting for someone like him to stumble upon it. Joe, in full diving gear, jumped into the water with practiced ease. His head broke the surface moments later, and he pointed downward, signaling that he was ready. Harold turned the engine off and watched as Joe disappeared below, leaving nothing but ripples in the water's surface. For the first few minutes, the boat was silent. The wind had died down, and the world seemed suspended in time. The silence stretched, and Harold's thoughts began to race again. What could Joe possibly find? Was it just a wreck, as he had assumed? Or was it something far older, something better left undisturbed? Time ticked by slowly. 10 minutes, 20, a half hour. Harold's hands gripped the wheel tighter, the sweat on his palms a clear sign of his growing anxiety. Had something gone wrong? Was Joe still down there? And then, just as Harold was about to call out to him, Joe resurfaced, pulling himself back into the boat with surprising speed. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Jesus, Harold, you won't believe what I saw," Joe gasped, gasping for breath. "Tell me, what is it?" Harold asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Joe wiped his brow, eyes darting nervously to the water, as if expecting something to emerge from the depths at any moment. "It's not just a chain," he said, his voice low. "It's attached to something huge, and it's moving." "Moving?" Harold echoed. "How?" Joe swallowed hard, glancing once more at the water. "I thought I saw something big. At first I thought it was a whale or a big shark, but it was too controlled. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like the chain was part of something else, something deliberate." Harold felt a cold shiver run through him. He wanted to dismiss Joe's words as panic, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his old friend was telling the truth. "Are you sure?" Harold asked, leaning closer. "You think there's something down there?" Joe nodded slowly, his face set in grim lines. "Whatever it is, it doesn't belong. It's not natural." The words hung in the air between them. Something wasn't right, and they both knew it. "You didn't bring up any samples, did you?" Harold asked, trying to make light of the situation, though his voice betrayed the anxiety gnawing at him. Joe shook his head. "No, I couldn't. I got too close. Whatever was down there, it was almost like it was aware of me." Harold's stomach churned. This was no longer a simple mystery. There was something deliberate, something intelligent, pulling at the chain, holding it tight in the depths. It wasn't just a wreck or old debris. There was something else down there, something alive. Harold took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We need to call someone. We need real divers, not just us." Joe hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I agree. But who? We need to be careful. Whatever it is down there, it's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Harold repeated, his mind spinning. Was this really happening? For the first time since the strange event began, Harold felt true fear. Whatever was beneath the surface wasn't just a curiosity. It was a threat, and it was still pulling on the chain. What did Joe really see down there? Could there be more to the story than either of them realized? Would you dive into those waters? Or would you leave the mystery for someone else to solve? Let us know in the comments below. And make sure to like and subscribe to hear the chilling developments in this story. You won't believe what happens next. Joe and Harold sat in the small boat, the weight of the situation heavy between them. The sea, once their shared companion, now felt like an adversary. Joe's hands were clenched, his knuckles white beneath the water's sheen as he gripped the edge of the boat, still shaken by what he had witnessed. Harold's gaze never left the water. The chain, or whatever it was attached to, remained hidden beneath the surface. But it was no longer just an object. It had become a threat, an enigma that seemed determined to remain buried in the depths. The air was thick with tension. Harold's mind raced, each thought colliding with the next. He'd seen wrecks before, of course, old ships, forgotten submarines, and even the remnants of military installations sunk by time and neglect. But this wasn't a wreck. This wasn't something that simply sank, forgotten by history. Whatever was down there, it was still active. It was aware. Joe shifted uncomfortably, breaking Harold's train of thought. "We need to make a decision," he said quietly. "Either we call someone else, or we go back down there. But I'm telling you, Harold, whatever is in that water, it's no accident. It's not just debris." Harold nodded, his throat dry. He wanted to call for help, for the authorities, for the Coast Guard. anyone who could help him understand what was happening. But something deep within him hesitated. They were in uncharted territory here, and the kind of help they needed didn't exist in any manual. It wasn't a missing ship or an abandoned anchor. It was something else, something that felt deliberate. Who would we even call? Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Who knows about this kind of thing? This isn't just salvage work anymore, Joe. This is something else. Joe's eyes flickered toward the horizon, his gaze distant. Maybe we shouldn't call anyone just yet, he said, voice lowering even further. I mean, think about it. What if we're onto something big? What if it's something they've been hiding? Some kind of secret? Harold felt a shiver run down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was the way Joe said it, or if it was the idea itself that disturbed him more, but it felt wrong. You think we should keep it quiet? Harold asked, voice rising. We could be in over our heads. If this is some government secret, or worse? Worse? Joe cut in, his eyes narrowing. What could be worse than the truth, Harold? The sea's always had its secrets. Maybe this is just one of them. Harold swallowed hard, glancing once again at the water. The chain still lurked beneath, as if mocking their hesitation. He wasn't sure if Joe was being paranoid, or if deep down he felt the same gnawing sense of something hidden, something dangerous, just waiting to be uncovered. The boat drifted for a while in silence, both men contemplating their options. In the end, it was Harold who broke the stillness. Okay, we'll check it out ourselves, he said, his decision final. But we go in prepared. We need to know what we're dealing with before we go pulling at chains and getting caught in something we can't get out of. Joe nodded, his expression hardening. Agreed. I'll grab my gear. But I'm not diving back down there until we have something to pull it with, something sturdy. We're not going down blind. Harold turned the boat back toward the harbor, his thoughts a whirlwind. What had they stumbled upon? He couldn't shake the thought that they weren't just dealing with an old shipwreck, or even a natural phenomenon. The way Joe had described the pull of the chain, it wasn't random. It wasn't a simple object that had been dragged to the bottom of the ocean. No, this was a deliberate placement, a deliberate pull, and whatever it was, it didn't want them near it. As the boat slowly made its way back to the marina, Harold's mind kept returning to the same question. Why was the chain down there in the first place? How had it remained hidden for so long? And why had it pulled back when he tried to lift it? Was it a trap? A warning? Or was it something far more ominous than they could even begin to understand? By the time they returned to the dock, the sun had begun to set, casting a golden-orange glow over the water. The fog had dissipated completely, but the strange feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, remained. Harold jumped off the boat, his boots thudding against the wooden planks. He glanced over his shoulder at Joe, who was already unloading his equipment. It was a quiet, eerie moment, one that felt almost too normal in light of everything they'd just experienced. "Let's get everything ready," Joe said, his voice a little less certain now, a little more cautious. "We'll need a heavy-duty winch, something with power behind it." Harold nodded, watching as Joe disappeared into his small shed to gather the necessary tools. He had no idea how they were going to get down there, or what they would find when they did, but he knew one thing for sure: they had to act fast. The more time they wasted, the more time the thing in the water had to hide itself. As Harold waited, he began to feel a growing sense of dread, a sinking feeling in his gut. Something about the entire situation wasn't right. It wasn't just the chain or the way it had resisted. It wasn't just Joe's cryptic warnings. It was the sense of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The boat was ready, Joe had his gear, and the sun was setting. But Harold still felt as though they were moving too quickly, like they were walking into a trap. He turned back to Joe, who was already heading toward the water with his diving mask in hand. "Joe, we need to think this through," Harold called out, his voice unsteady. Joe turned, a bemused smile on his face. "What's wrong, Harold? You've been in the water more times than you can count. This is just another day at sea, right?" Harold shook his head, his breath caught in his throat. "No, I've been thinking. This chain, it's not just something we pull up. It's a sign of something bigger, something we're not prepared for." Joe paused, his face growing serious. "Bigger? Harold, it's just a chain. We pull it up, see what's attached to it, and we move on." Harold didn't answer right away. He just stared at the water, the rippling surface reflecting the fading light. In the distance, he could see a few other boats bobbing lazily in the water, unaware of the danger just beneath their feet. "I don't know if we should be doing this," Harold muttered almost to himself. Maybe we should call someone else. Someone who knows what they're dealing with. But it was too late. Joe was already on his way to the boat, his voice low and resolute. You want answers, Harold? So do I. But we can't wait forever. Harold stared after him, his gut telling him they were stepping into the unknown. But in that moment, he knew there was no turning back. The chain was calling them, and no matter how hard they tried to resist, it would pull them deeper into its mystery. What do you think they'll find when they finally pull the chain up? Is it a relic of the past? Or is it something far more dangerous? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss the rest of the story. As the boat powered through the darkening water, Harold felt a palpable tension in the air. It was as if the ocean itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Joe had gone quiet, focused on the task ahead. His fingers worked deftly, securing the winch and adjusting the lines, but his eyes darted frequently toward the water, his unease mirrored in the way his lips pressed into a tight line. Harold could feel the cold creeping up his spine as they neared the spot where they had discovered the chain. His instincts were on edge. Everything about this felt wrong. It wasn't just the strange tugging sensation when he tried to pull the chain. It was the way the sea seemed to shift in response, like it was alive, watching them. Joe's voice cut through the silence, low and steady. Ready, Harold? This time we're going to pull it all the way up. Harold didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gripped the wheel tightly, trying to steady his breath. The boat rocked gently on the waves, and for a moment, it almost felt like nothing had changed, as though they were just two fishermen, going about their daily business. But in reality, they were standing on the precipice of something much bigger, something they were both just starting to understand. Yeah, I'm ready, Harold finally muttered, but his voice sounded hollow even to him. Joe nodded, and with a deep breath, he began working the winch. The mechanism groaned as it tightened, the rope cutting through the water like a sharp knife. Slowly but steadily, the chain began to emerge, its rusted surface glinting faintly in the dimming light. For a moment, nothing happened. The chain simply rose, inch by inch, moving steadily through the water. But then, just like before, the resistance came. It was immediate and undeniable. The chain jerked sharply, and the winch's motor stalled for a brief moment. Joe cursed under his breath, his hands gripping the controls with white knuckles. This is it, he said through gritted teeth. Whatever's on the other end of this chain is massive. I don't know how much longer the winch can take it. Harold's heart pounded in his chest. He had to admit, he had expected resistance, but nothing like this. Whatever they were dealing with, it wasn't just some abandoned wreck or forgotten cargo. This was something alive, something that didn't want to be found. Maybe we should call in the Coast Guard, Harold suggested, his voice shaky with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. This is getting too dangerous. We don't know what we're dealing with. Joe didn't respond right away. He was too focused, his gaze fixed on the chain as it slowly inched higher. We can't call the Coast Guard, Joe finally said. Not yet. We need to know what this is first. After all, who would believe us if we just said we found a chain with something pulling on the other end of it? Harold was silent for a moment, staring at the water, his mind racing. He understood Joe's point. If they called the Coast Guard now, they'd be laughed at, dismissed as overzealous fishermen who had gotten caught up in some wild theory. But what if they were right? What if this was something more? Something that had been hidden for years? The winch continued to strain, the sound of metal scraping against metal filling the air. Joe's muscles bulged with the effort, but he didn't slow down. We're almost there, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Whatever it is, we're going to find it. But then, something unexpected happened. The chain suddenly lurched upward, breaking free with a violent snap that sent the boat rocking on its side. Joe lost his grip on the winch, falling back into the boat with a curse. Harold's hands shot out instinctively, grabbing onto the edge of the boat to steady himself. The chain continued to rise, dragging itself out of the water like an ancient serpent reawakening. Harold's breath caught in his throat. The chain was enormous, longer than he had first thought, and it was still coming. Each link, heavy with rust, clattered as it emerged, its surface rough and pitted from years of saltwater corrosion. But as the chain finally broke the surface, something even more unexpected happened. From beneath the water, a deep rumbling sound echoed. It was low at first, almost imperceptible, like the growl of a predator just below the surface. But then it grew louder, vibrating through the boat and reverberating in Harold's chest. It was as if the ocean itself was protesting their intrusion. Joe scrambled to his feet, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" Harold had no answer. His heart raced as he stared at the water, watching as the last of the chain finally broke free. For a brief moment, everything went still. The sea calmed, the air stilled, and the boat rocked gently as though nothing had happened. But then, the chain moved. Harold's eyes widened in disbelief as the links of the chain began to shift. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The whole length of it began to writhe, like a great metal snake coiling and uncoiling beneath the surface. The rumbling sound grew louder, and now it was joined by a strange clicking noise, like the sound of something large moving in the depths. "Get the hell out of here!" Joe shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "This isn't right, Harold. This isn't a shipwreck. It's something alive." Harold didn't need any more convincing. He slammed the throttle forward, but the boat only jerked forward a few feet before the engine sputtered and died. The rumbling beneath the water was too strong. Something was pulling at the boat, dragging it backward toward the spot where the chain had once been. Harold's pulse quickened. He couldn't understand it. What was going on? Was the sea alive? Had they stumbled upon some kind of ancient underwater creature? Or was this the result of something even darker, something man-made? As the boat lurched once more, Harold glanced back at the water. He could see the outline of something massive just below the surface. It was dark, shifting, and large enough to pull their boat off course. The chain continued to wriggle, as if it had a mind of its own, pulling and twisting like a creature trying to break free from its restraints. But what was it tied to? And what would happen if they didn't get away? Joe was already scrambling for his gear, ready to abandon ship if necessary. His face was a mix of terror and disbelief, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the oxygen tanks. "We need to go now," he yelled. Harold's hands were shaking too. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. Whatever they had uncovered, it was more than a chain, more than an old wreck. It was something else, something far older and far more dangerous than either of them had prepared for. What exactly was lurking beneath the surface? Was it a long-forgotten sea creature? A piece of lost history? Or was it something far more terrifying? An ancient force that had been buried by the ocean itself for a reason? Do you think the chain is part of something bigger? Or is this just the beginning of something much more dangerous? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're just as captivated by this mystery as we are, make sure to like this video and subscribe to stay updated on what happens next. Trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming. As the boat lurched uncontrollably, Harold's hands gripped the wheel, his mind racing. The ocean had gone from calm to chaos in the blink of an eye, and everything they thought they understood about the sea, about the chain, had just been upended. The power beneath the surface was undeniable. Something was pulling at them, and it wasn't the water itself. It was something alive, something they couldn't see, but they could feel in every ounce of their bodies. The chain had stopped writhing for a moment, and for the briefest second, everything went eerily still. The low rumble which had been steadily vibrating the boat seemed to die down, but the tension in the air was unbearable. Harold's gut told him that the worst was yet to come. "Joe, we need to go now," Harold shouted, his voice strained, but the terror in his chest was thickening. He could see Joe still fumbling with his diving gear, clearly not comprehending the magnitude of the situation. Joe, still shaking, finally looked up. "What the hell is that? What is happening?" His words were barely a whisper, as if speaking louder might make the nightmare real. Harold didn't have an answer, but the fear in his voice spoke volumes. "Whatever it is, Joe, it's not just some wreck. We've uncovered something that was never meant to be found." His hands were sweating on the wheel as he tried desperately to restart the engine, but it refused to turn over. The boat had become completely immobilized, caught in the pull of whatever lurked below. Then, just as Harold was about to abandon hope and prepare to jump into the water, a deep guttural noise emanated from the depths. It was louder now, almost like a roar, vibrating through the boat as though the very ocean was alive with rage. And then, a sudden surge of water erupted from beneath them. A geyser of sea foam rose into the air like an explosion, as something massive and unseen broke the surface for a fleeting moment. The boat lurched forward, and in that instant, Harold caught a glimpse, a silhouette beneath the water, moving with terrifying speed. It was too fast, too powerful, to be a shipwreck. The outline was too smooth, too fluid. There was no structure to it, just a dark mass that seemed to pulse beneath the surface. And the chain, which had once seemed like a mere curiosity, was now its tether. Harold's mind raced. The thing they'd uncovered wasn't just a shipwreck. It was something alive, something that had been chained to the depths for a reason, something ancient, something dangerous. Joe's voice was drowned out by the roar of the water, but his expression said everything. His eyes were wide with shock, as though he was witnessing a living nightmare. Harold wanted to shout, to scream at the top of his lungs, but nothing would come out. His voice had been stolen by the enormity of the discovery. With a final violent twist, the boat was yanked backward, dragged toward the heart of the turmoil. The water around them churned as if the ocean itself was reaching up to claim them, pulling with the force of 1,000 tides. It was then that Harold realized just how deep this mystery ran. They weren't just dealing with something that had been lost at sea. They were dealing with something ancient, something that should never have been disturbed. They had awakened a force that had been buried for a reason, and now it was angry. "Harold, we need to get the hell out of here," Joe screamed, his voice barely audible over the roar of the water. But before Harold could respond, a deep, bone-shaking tremor rippled through the boat, and the water exploded in all directions. The chain snapped upward, rising high into the air before crashing back down into the water with a deafening splash. The boat rocked violently, nearly capsizing under the weight of the force. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The chaos stilled, leaving them in an eerie silence. And then, without warning, the boat was yanked backward with such force that Harold felt his grip slip from the wheel. The water surged around them like a tidal wave, dragging them toward the mysterious force below. The boat was caught in its grip, unable to escape. In the blink of an eye, Harold realized they were no longer in control. The ocean had claimed them. "Joe, hold on!" Harold yelled, reaching out for anything to hold on to. The boat was completely out of control, and the force beneath the water was dragging them deeper. But as the darkness of the water closed in, the massive shadow beneath the surface rose one last time. Its form became clearer, and Harold saw it. It wasn't a shipwreck. It wasn't a creature of the deep. It was something beyond that, something ancient, something forged in a time long before man had walked the earth. Harold's heart pounded in his chest. What had they uncovered, and what price would they pay for disturbing it? And as the boat was finally yanked beneath the waves, the question hung in the air. Had they disturbed something that had been waiting, hidden, beneath the ocean's depths for centuries? Or had they stumbled into something far darker, something that had never been meant to be found? The question still echoes in the depths of the ocean, and it's a question you need to answer. What do you think is behind the mystery of the chain? Is it an ancient creature, a forgotten war machine, or something even more sinister? We want to know what you think. Drop your theories in the comments below. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. You won't want to miss the next chapter in this mystery. Trust us, the truth is far deeper than we ever imagined. This mystery is far from over.